Amazing people, insightful visionaries, I welcome you to yet another episode of the Insightful Daily. This is your friend, the visionary 4 times Miss Lesego, and I welcome you to this incredible episode. In today's episode, we're going to be talking about something that is very close to my heart, a very interesting subject matter, which is tax and tax evasion. First, we need to understand the introduction of tax, particularly in the context of Botswana. What exactly is tax and how important is tax in our lives? What is tax exactly? A very wise man once said that in this life, 2 things are certain. 1 is tax, 2 is death. You can see how important tax is in our day-to-day lives. So now coming back to the context of Botswana, you need to understand that prior to the colonial rule, there was not a clear form of tax in Botswana as we know today, until in the 18th century, particularly in the year 1899, when the advent British rule introduced what is known as the hut tax. This was a tax that was levied against every hut that occupied a space, so it was directed to the natives. And since the economy was largely rural and agricultural, Botswana at that time had to pay the tax in form of grain, in form of livestock, and even pound sterling. The chiefs, or our chiefs at that time, were the ones who had the authority of tax collection. There was no BURS at that time. And later, as time went on, there was introduction of other taxes such as poll tax, which was a bit problematic in a sense that it caused some inequity, in a sense that everyone was required to pay the same amount regardless of their economic level. Maybe before I can go any far, I need to help you understand this. Tax is very important in a sense that the revenues that are collected from tax, they serve a really important role in society. That used to build our infrastructure, that used to build public goods such as roads, such as schools, such as all these important infrastructure that we need in our day-to-day lives, or that makes our lives much easier. In 1922, for the first time, we started to have the first introduction of a more equitable and even adequate taxation legislation that happened. And this was when now Botswana had the genesis of tax law. This new development meant that tax was income-based. From there, amendments were made with time to cater for the changes in the economy and even social structure. When we got our independence in 1966 from the British rule, there was a need for consolidating tax enactment. And now, in 1973, the Income Tax Act of Botswana was enacted, and it was the primary tax law that we had for Botswana up to this day. With more developments, the tax structure improved, and this resulted in various tax regimes. And even in the mid-70s, when the diamonds were first discovered in Botswana, we now had more tax forms such as the mineral revenue, which is still the largest and even the most significant tax base in Botswana. Most recently, as we started talking about diversity and even encouraging investment in other sectors, we saw an introduction of taxation which effectively makes tax rates in Botswana to be among the lowest in the world. For instance, the company tax, which ranges between 22 to 25%, and even the manufacturing tax, or the tax for companies that are manufacturing, which is 15%. With the standard of living increasing daily, we recently had introduction of other forms of tax such as taxation against luxury goods. Luxury goods, we are talking about things like cigarettes and alcohol. And also the sales tax, which has always been there, has been also increased against a few selected items. But all in all, Tax Income Act remains the most important tax legislation to date. My dear friends, now I'll be taking you through the most important aspect of tax in Botswana, or the most important tax in Botswana. But first I need to make you realize that the tax in Botswana is very territorial, meaning that the way in which tax is paid is made in such a way that it focuses on the income that is made in Botswana. There's an income that is made by non-residents. These are people who are not currently staying in Botswana, but they're making or they're having sources of income that are in Botswana. And then there's people who stay in Botswana and at the same time they're getting income from Botswana. So those are the categories that we have in terms of how our taxation operates. At this moment, you need to understand that income tax is by far the largest or the most common type of tax in Botswana. What happens with income tax is that an individual is liable for tax on their earnings and even the profits that are generated from a source or even a deemed source within Botswana. That is the whole definition of income tax. The most important dates for tax in Botswana is 30th September, and that is the reason why I'm making this episode right now, because we are in August and September is just the next month. So if you've not yet filed your tax returns, this is a beautiful reminder to you that make sure that you go and file your tax before the 30th of September approaches. And another important date in terms of tax is 30th June, and that is a very important date because it marks the beginning, or rather the end, of the financial year for tax. As I mentioned earlier, my dear friends, income tax in Botswana is recovered at the source under what is known as payee. If you have done accounting or if you've taken accounting classes, you would know that there's something called payee. Payee is just an abbreviation for pay as you earn. It's a salary deduction system and withholding tax. What happens is that your tax is deducted or recovered directly from the source. By the time the money reaches your bank account as somebody who earns an income or a certain income that is considered to be taxable, it has already been taxed. So currently in Botswana, there are categories in which tax is being done. For instance, people who have an income of 36,000 pula annually as their earnings and above, they have a taxation starting from 5% to 25%. For example, an individual whose gross income exceeds 36,000 is required to register as a taxpayer, and they are required to submit their tax returns not later than the due date of 30th September. However, an extension can be made following a request. So if at all you know that by the 30th of September you will not be able to pay or submit your tax returns, make sure that you communicate with the tax authorities so that they can give you an extension. And then for people with an income that's above 144,000 pula, it is likely to be subject to the highest marginal tax of 25%, and these taxes apply to residents of Botswana only. For non-residents, there are conditions that apply to them too. They are required to pay their tax and even comply with all tax returns and compliance obligations in the same way as residents, even though they're taxed slightly different from the residents in a sense that they are not given any exemption from tax for the first month. As I mentioned earlier, that any earning that is from 36,000 pula and above is taxed at a minimum rate of 5%. What happens is that when you are a resident in Botswana, the first month is tax exempt, so you will not be taxed for the first month of you earning or making that 36,000. However, if you are a non-resident, that 5% is being taxed even on the first or in the first month that you are making that earning. So now I'm going to be sharing with you the most important categories that are there in our tax bracket in Botswana. The people who earn between 0 pula and 72,000 pula, as per the changes that have been recently made, they pay a tax of 0 pula. So that means if in the whole year you make less than 72,000 pula, you're going to pay 0 pula tax. The second category is for the people who earn any earnings that is from 72,001 to 108,000 pula per annum. These people, they pay a tax of 3,600 pula. And then the next category is for people who earn from 108 to 144,000 pula. These ones, they pay a total amount of 8,100 pula per annum. Those are their tax returns. And then the final category is for people who earn above 144,000 pula. These ones, they're paying an amount of 14,850 pula per annum. And these are the people who fall under the category that is considered to be taxable. But for non-residents, With all that information, I believe by now, my dear friends, you are ready to make sure that in this tax season, you go and submit and file your returns with the Botswana Unified Revenue Services, because this is the tax season. You know what happens if you don't pay your taxes. Taxes are very important for the progress of our nation. But this is just the introduction, my amazing friends. I believe you've learned so much about tax. You have an idea at least of what exactly is tax, how tax is done in Botswana, when did tax start in Botswana. The next episode will be very interesting, as I'll be taking you through taxes in Botswana, but I'll be taking you the kind or the types of taxes that we have in Botswana, and then from there I'll move on now to other things like tax evasion and tax avoidance, so that you have more understanding about tax in overall and how tax works and how important it is to have knowledge about taxes. With all that, this brings us to the end of episode 10 of the Insightful Daily with your friend, the visionary 4 times Miss Lesego. So don't forget to follow our channel on anchor.fm. Don't forget to subscribe to our YouTube channel. With all that, it's a peace from me.